The dust devils danced across the barren expanse of Redemption Creek, swirling red earth into miniature tornadoes that dissipated as quickly as they formed. The town sat like a collection of weathered bones bleaching under the merciless sun, its wooden buildings groaning against the constant assault of wind that swept down from the canyon passes. It was a place where hope came to die, where dreams were buried beneath layers of alkali dust and broken promises. Jack Colton squinted against the late afternoon glare, his hand instinctively adjusting the brim of his hat as his horse picked its way down the familiar trail. 6 years. 6 long years since he'd last seen these ramshackle buildings, since he'd tasted the grit of this particular dust on his tongue. The weight of the gold in his saddlebag seemed insignificant compared to the heaviness in his chest as he approached the outskirts of town. He was a different man now. The desperate boy who'd left with nothing but determination and a pickaxe had been replaced by someone harder, weathered by California goldfields and Utah silver mines. His clothes were no longer patched and threadbare, but cut from good cloth. His boots crafted by skilled hands rather than cobbled together from scraps. Success had etched itself into the lines around his eyes and the set of his shoulders. But it had also carved away something softer, something he'd thought he might find again upon his return. The town hadn't changed much. Murphy's general store still leaned precariously to the left, as if perpetually drunk. The church steeple still stood crooked, a testament to the carpenter's fondness for whiskey over precision. But there were new graves in the cemetery on the hill, fresh mounds of earth among the weathered crosses. Time had continued its relentless march in his absence. As Jack rode down Main Street, faces peered from windows and doorways. Some squinted in vague recognition. Others turned away with the practiced indifference of those who'd learned not to care about strangers passing through. He kept his eyes forward, fighting the urge to search for one particular face among them. He'd rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in his mind, but now that it was here, his carefully prepared words scattered like tumbleweeds. He dismounted at the livery stable, the familiar smell of hay and horse sweat triggering memories he'd tried to bury. Old Sam, the stable hand, looked up from his work, his eyes widening slightly. "That you, Jack Colton?" Sam's voice was rough with age and tobacco. "Heard you was dead, or worse." "Not dead," Jack replied, handing over his horse's reins. "Just gone for a while." Sam's gaze traveled over Jack's fine clothes, lingering on the quality of his saddle. "Seems going suited you well enough." Jack didn't respond. He'd learned that silence often served better than explanations. After securing lodging at the hotel, a luxury he never could have afforded before, he found himself walking the familiar path toward the Whitmore place before he'd consciously decided to do so. The old well stood at the crossroads, its wooden frame more weathered than he remembered. The bucket hung crooked on frayed rope, and the stone lip bore the marks of countless hands over countless years. He'd kissed Clara here once, hidden by twilight and the old cottonwood tree. They'd been 17, full of dreams as vast as the prairie sky. He heard her before he saw her, the creak of the well handle, the splash of water far below. When she emerged from behind the well housing, time seemed to stutter and stop. Clara Whitmore had always been beautiful in the way wildflowers were beautiful, not cultivated or tame, but fierce in their determination to bloom despite harsh conditions. But the woman before him now looked as if she'd weathered too many storms. Her honey-colored hair, once worn loose and free, was pulled back in a severe bun. Lines of worry creased her forehead, and her cornflower blue eyes held shadows that hadn't been there before. She saw him and froze, the water bucket trembling in her hands. For a moment, they simply stared at each other across the years and the dust and all the unspoken words between them. Jack. His name on her lips was barely a whisper, carried away by the wind. He took a step forward, then stopped. Something was wrong. The way she held herself, the protective angle of her body, the loose drape of her worn shawl despite the heat. His eyes dropped involuntarily, and his heart clenched. She was with child. The swell of her belly was unmistakable despite her attempts to hide it beneath the coarse fabric. The evidence of life growing within her, life that couldn't possibly be his. Clara's face flushed, her free hand moving instinctively to her stomach before dropping to her side. She straightened her shoulders, lifting her chin with a defiance that was achingly familiar. "You shouldn't have come back," she said, her voice stronger now, but still threaded with something he couldn't quite name. Fear, sorrow, shame. "Clara, He didn't know how to finish. All his imagined speeches crumbled in the face of this reality. "There's nothing for you here. Jack." She turned away, water sloshing over the rim of the bucket. Nothing but dust and broken things. He wanted to reach for her, to demand explanations, to rage against whatever had led to this moment. Instead, he stood rooted to the spot, watching her struggle with the heavy bucket. When he moved to help, she flinched away. "Don't!" The word was sharp as glass. "People will talk. Since when have you cared what people say?" A bitter laugh escaped her. "Since I learned the price of not caring." She walked away, her gait slightly uneven under the weight of the water and the child she carried. Jack remained by the well, the setting sun painting the world in shades of red and gold. The cottonwood tree cast long shadows, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled its loneliness to the darkening sky. He remembered another evening, years ago, when they'd sat beneath this very tree planning their future. He would work the Whitmore farm, save every penny, and eventually buy land of their own. She would wait for him, no matter how long it took. They'd been so certain then, so sure that love could overcome any obstacle. "I'll make something of myself," he'd promised, holding her hands in his calloused ones. "I'll come back for you, Clara, I swear it." She'd kissed him then, fierce and sweet. "I'll be here," she'd whispered against his lips. Always. But always had proven to be a shorter time than either of them had imagined. He'd left when her father had made it clear that no hired hand would ever be good enough for his daughter. Pride and poverty had driven him west, chasing rumors of gold and silver, determined to return as a man worthy of her hand. Now he was back, his pockets full and his hands clean of the dirt that had once defined him. But she belonged to another, carried another man's child beneath her heart. The cruel irony of it burned like acid in his throat, as darkness fell over Redemption Creek. Jack made his way back to the hotel. The saloon was already rowdy with the sounds of men trying to forget their troubles in whiskey and cards. He considered joining them, losing himself in the familiar rituals of drinking and gambling. But his feet carried him to his room instead. He sat on the narrow bed, staring at the wall where faded wallpaper peeled away like old skin. Through the thin walls, he could hear the sounds of life continuing, laughter, arguments, the creak of footsteps on worn floorboards. The world moved on, indifferent to the ache in his chest. He'd thought coming home would be a triumph. He'd imagined Clara's joy, her father's grudging acceptance, a wedding in the little church with its crooked steeple. Instead, he'd found only the bitter taste of too late and the hollow victory of success that no longer mattered. Outside his window, the wind picked up, rattling the glass in its frame. It carried with it the scent of sage and dust, the eternal perfume of this unforgiving land. Somewhere out there, Clara was lying in her bed, perhaps feeling the child move within her, perhaps thinking of him, or perhaps she'd already forgotten, moved on as completely as the years suggested. Jack pulled off his boots, the fine leather suddenly feeling like a costume he no longer wished to wear. Tomorrow he would have to decide, stay and torture himself with what could never be, or leave again and try to forget. But tonight, he simply lay in the darkness, listening to the wind and remembering the girl who'd once promised to wait forever. The moon rose over Redemption Creek, casting silver light on empty streets and broken dreams. And in his hotel room, Jack Colton, successful man and forever stranger, finally understood that some distances couldn't be measured in miles or years, but only in the space between two hearts that had learned to beat apart. The morning sun cast long shadows across Main Street as Jack made his way to Murphy's General Store. The proprietor, a thin man with nervous hands, nearly dropped a jar of preserves when he recognized his customer. "Jack Colton, that really you?" Murphy's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed. "Heard you struck it rich out in California." I did well enough. Jack selected supplies with practiced efficiency. Tell me about the Whitmores. Murphy's face darkened, his eyes darting toward the door as if someone might be listening. Sad business. That old Thomas died 2 winters back. Pneumonia took him during the worst cold snap we'd seen in years. Left Clara alone with the farm and... He paused, wringing his hands. And, Jack prompted, though his jaw clenched at what he suspected was coming. Debts. Terrible debts. The drought of '83 hit hard, and Thomas borrowed heavy from Horace Bellamy to keep the farm running. When he passed, well... Murphy shook his head. Bellamy's not known for his Christian charity. Jack knew Horace Bellamy by reputation, a man who'd arrived in Redemption Creek 5 years ago with money and ambition, quickly establishing himself as both benefactor and predator to those in need. He owned the largest ranch in the valley, the lumber mill, and held notes on half the properties in town. The child, Jack said quietly, not quite making it a question. Murphy's discomfort was palpable. He busied himself arranging canned goods that didn't need arranging. Miss Clara's been keeping to herself mostly. You know how folks talk in a small town. Jack left with his purchases and a cold fury building in his chest. He'd known men like Bellamy in the mining camps, men who used their power like a weapon, taking what they wanted because they could. That afternoon, he visited the cemetery on the hill. Thomas Whitmore's grave was marked by a simple wooden cross, already weathering in the harsh elements. Jack stood before it, remembering the proud man who'd once told him he'd never be good enough for Clara. I kept my promise, Jack said to the silent grave. I came back successful, but I was too late to keep her safe. The wind whispered through the dried grass, offering no absolution. At the saloon that evening, Jack nursed a whiskey and listened to the talk of men deep in their cups. Horace Bellamy's name came up frequently. His latest land acquisition, his harsh treatment of debtors, his frequent visits to the Whitmore farm before Clara's condition became apparent. Shameful business, muttered Pete Harrison, a rancher Jack remembered from the old days. Taking advantage of a grieving woman like that. She had choices, another man argued. Could have sold the farm, moved to Denver or Santa Fe. Pride kept her here. Pride? Pete spat tobacco juice into a brass spittoon. You call protecting her father's legacy pride? That land's been Whitmore land for 20 years. What was she supposed to do? Let Bellamy steal it for pennies on the dollar? Better than what she did let him take. Someone murmured. An uncomfortable laughter rippled through the group. Jack's hand tightened on his glass until he thought it might shatter. These men spoke of Clara's shame as if it were entertainment, as if her suffering were merely gossip to pass the time. You got something to say, stranger? The speaker was young, probably not old enough to remember Jack from before. Jack set down his whiskey carefully. I'm saying a man who judges a desperate woman's choices has likely never been desperate himself. The saloon fell quiet. Several men shifted uneasily, recognizing the dangerous calm in Jack's voice. Pete Harrison broke the tension with a grunt of approval. Well said, though I wonder if you'd feel the same if it were your woman carrying another man's bastard. Jack stood, tossing coins on the bar. If she were my woman, she never would have been left alone and desperate in the first place. He walked out into the cool night air, leaving behind a wake of whispers. Let them talk. He had more important matters to attend to. The next morning, Jack rode out to survey the Whitmore property. The farm showed signs of neglect, fences needing mending, fields lying fallow, the barn roof patched but still sagging. Yet there were also signs of Clara's determination, a vegetable garden carefully tended, chickens scratching in their pen, wash hanging on the line like flags of defiance. He was examining a broken fence post when the sound of approaching horses made him turn. 3 riders approached, and Jack recognized the man in the lead immediately. Horace Bellamy looked exactly as Jack had imagined, soft around the middle from easy living, but with the cold eyes of a man who calculated human worth in dollars and cents. You're trespassing, Bellamy said without preamble. This is Whitmore land. I know whose land it is, Jack replied evenly. Just as you do. Bellamy's eyes narrowed, taking in Jack's bearing and clothing. You're the Colton boy who used to work here. Heard you'd come back flush. I'm no boy, and what I am or have is no concern of yours. It is if you're sniffing around property I have a legal interest in. Bellamy leaned forward in his saddle. Thomas Whitmore owed me considerable money when he died. His daughter's been making arrangements to satisfy the debt. The implication in his tone made Jack's blood burn, but he kept his expression neutral. And the child she carries? Is that part of the arrangement? Bellamy's face flushed. Mind your tongue. What happens between Miss Whitmore and myself is a private matter. Nothing's private in Redemption Creek, Jack said. And a man who'd use a woman's desperation against her is no man at all. One of Bellamy's companions reached for his sidearm, but Bellamy stopped him with a gesture. Careful. Colton, your newfound wealth doesn't make you bulletproof, and it certainly doesn't give you the right to interfere in illegal matters. Show me the papers, Jack challenged. Let me see these debts that give you claim to the Whitmore land. Bellamy smiled coldly. They're filed properly at the land office, everything legal and binding. Miss Whitmore knows what she owes, and she knows the consequences of default. The fact that she chose to be accommodating in her payments is between her and her conscience. Jack took a step forward, his hand moving instinctively toward his hip, though he wore no gun. You forced her, used her father's debts like chains. I forced nothing. Bellamy's voice was smooth as oil. I offered alternatives to foreclosure. She made her choice, just as she'll make another choice soon enough. Marry me and give the child a name, or face raising it alone as a fallen woman. Either way, I get what I'm owed. The casualness of his cruelty, the way he spoke of Clara as if she were livestock to be bargained over, made Jack's vision blur with rage. But before he could act, the sound of a wagon approaching interrupted them. Clara appeared over the rise, driving the old buckboard with practiced skill despite her condition. When she saw the gathering at her fence line, her face paled, but she didn't slow. Gentlemen, she said coolly as she pulled up. Mr. Bellamy, I wasn't expecting you today. Just explaining property rights to Mr. Colton here, Bellamy said, his tone possessive. He seems confused about boundaries. Clara's eyes met Jack's briefly before turning away. Mr. Colton is an old friend, merely passing through. I'm sure he meant no harm. Old friend. Bellamy tasted the words like wine. Yes, I've heard about your friendship, ancient history. I trust. The weight of threat in his words was unmistakable. Clara's knuckles whitened on the reins, but her voice remained steady. As you say, ancient history. Good. Bellamy touched his hat brim in a mockery of courtesy. I'll call on you tomorrow. My dear, we have matters to discuss regarding your future. He wheeled his horse around, his men following. As they rode away, Jack saw Clara sway slightly in her seat. He moved quickly to steady her, but she jerked away. Don't touch me, she hissed. Haven't you done enough damage for one day? Clara, I was trying to... To what? To save me? Her laugh was bitter. I'm past saving. Jack, can't you see that? She climbed down from the wagon awkwardly, one hand pressed to her back. Jack noticed the deep circles under her eyes, the way her hands trembled. How long? He asked quietly. How long has he been coming here? Clara turned away, unhitching the horses with mechanical movements. Since the week after Father's funeral. He was so kind at first, so understanding. Extended the loan payments, offered to help with the harvest. I was grateful, foolish and grateful. When did he... Jack couldn't finish the question. When did he make it clear what he really wanted in payment? Clara's voice was flat, emotionless. The first night he stayed for supper. Said I looked tired. Said I needed a man's help around the place. His hand on mine across the table, telling me how beautiful grief made me look. She led the horses toward the barn, and Jack followed. Inside, the familiar smells of hay and leather transported him back to simpler times. when their biggest worry had been finding moments alone together. "I refused him," Clara continued, her back to Jack as she removed the harnesses. "Told him I could manage alone. That's when he showed me the true accounts. Father had hidden how bad things were, the drought, the failed crops, the loans to keep us afloat. We owed more than the farm was worth. So you—" Again, Jack couldn't voice it. Clara spun to face him, her eyes blazing. "So, I survived. I did what I had to do to keep this land, to honor my father's memory. 3 nights, that's all. 3 nights of closing my eyes and pretending I was somewhere else. Someone else. And now—" Her hand went to her belly. "Now I carry the proof of my shame for all to see." The tears came then, silent streams down her cheeks. Jack reached for her, and this time she didn't pull away, collapsing against his chest with a sob that seemed torn from her very soul. "I waited for you," she whispered against his shirt. "Even after Father died, even when everything fell apart, I kept thinking you'd come back, that somehow you'd know I needed you." Jack held her, his own eyes burning, the weight of his absence, of all the miles and years between them, pressed down like a physical thing. In the barn where they'd once stolen kisses and whispered promises, he held the woman he'd failed to protect and felt his heart break all over again. The weeks that followed were marked by the cruel whispers that trailed Clara wherever she went. At Sunday service, the respectable women of Redemption Creek pulled their skirts aside when she passed, as if her condition might be contagious. Mrs. Henderson, the banker's wife, made a show of gathering her daughters close whenever Clara appeared at the general store. "Shameful," Clara heard Mrs. Pruitt whisper to her companion as they passed on the street. "In my day, such women knew enough to hide themselves away." Clara kept her chin high, her hand protectively over her growing belly, but each word struck like a physical blow. She'd grown accustomed to shopping at dawn when the store was empty, to taking the back pew at church, to the way conversations died when she entered a room. In the solitude of her farm, she found peace only in routine, feeding chickens, tending her garden, mending what she could afford to mend. The nights were hardest, when the empty house echoed with memories and the weight of her choices pressed down like a stone on her chest. She remembered those precious years with Jack as if viewing them through glass, distant, untouchable, perfect in their simplicity. How they'd danced at the harvest festival, scandalizing the chaperones with the way he'd held her. How he'd carved their initials in the old cottonwood tree, promising eternity with a pocket knife and youthful certainty. One evening, as purple twilight painted the sky, she stood on the porch watching the sun sink behind the mountains. That's when she saw him approaching, leading a horse laden with lumber and supplies. "What are you doing?" she called out as Jack began unloading materials near her broken fence. "What needs doing?" he replied without looking up. "This fence won't last another winter. I didn't ask for your help. You didn't have to." He pulled out a hammer and nails, setting to work with practiced efficiency. Friends help each other. That hasn't changed. Clara wanted to argue, to send him away before tongues started wagging even more viciously. But the sight of him working, sleeves rolled up, forearms bronzed by the sun, so achingly familiar, stole her words. She went inside and returned with a jar of water and 2 cups. They worked in companionable silence as stars began to appear. Jack replaced rotted posts and restrung wire, while Clara held lanterns and handed him tools. It felt like dancing, this wordless coordination born of years of knowing each other's rhythms. "You'll set the whole town talking," Clara said finally as they took a break, sitting on the porch steps. "Let them talk." Jack wiped sweat from his brow. "They're doing it anyway. It's different for you. You're a man. You have money now. Respect. I'm just the fallen woman carrying another man's child." Jack turned to look at her, the lantern light casting shadows across his face. "You're the strongest person I know. Clara Whitmore. Always have been." A bitter laugh escaped her. "Strong? I sold myself for a piece of land. What's strong about that? You survived. You protected what mattered to you when no one else would." His voice was fierce, That takes a kind of courage most people never have to find. Clara felt tears threatening again. These days, they came so easily, as if pregnancy had worn away all her careful walls. "Sometimes I dream it's yours," she whispered. "The baby. I dream we're married, that you never left, that none of this happened. Then I wake up, and the shame of wishing away an innocent life makes me sick." Jack's hand found hers in the darkness. "The child is innocent. Whatever circumstances brought it here, it deserves love, not shame. Easy words from someone who doesn't have to raise it alone, watching it grow up marked by my sins." They sat quietly for a moment, listening to the night sounds. Crickets, a distant coyote, the whisper of wind through grass. Then Jack spoke, his voice careful. "You don't have to be alone." Clara pulled her hand away. "Don't. Whatever you're thinking, don't say it." "I'm saying there are options, ways to protect you, to give the child a name." "Stop." She stood abruptly, pacing to the porch rail. "You think I haven't thought of everything?" Bellamy made his position clear. I can marry him and be respectable again, or I can refuse and watch him take the farm anyway when the baby comes and I can't keep up with the work. Her voice cracked. "Either way, I lose." "There's another way," Jack said quietly. "What, you'll buy off my debts? Turn me into your kept woman instead of his?" The words came out harsh, driven by fear and exhaustion. "I won't trade one kind of obligation for another." Jack flinched as if slapped. "That's not what I meant." "Then what? What grand solution do you have that I'm too simple to see?" He stood, moving close enough that she could smell the familiar scent of him. Leather and sweat and something indefinably Jack. "Marry me." The words hung between them like a challenge. Clara stared at him, certain she'd misheard. "You're mad." "Maybe." His jaw set in the stubborn line she knew so well. "But it makes sense. I have money now, enough to pay your debts and protect the farm. The child would have a name, a father. You'd be a respectable married woman. Not Bellamy's whore," Clara finished harshly. "Is that what you were going to say? That's not— Clara, please. And what about you?" She turned to face him fully, anger and pain warring in her chest. "What do you get from this arrangement? A wife who's been with another man? A child that isn't yours? The whole town knowing you married another man's leavings?" Jack grabbed her shoulders gently. "I get you. That's all I've ever wanted." The tenderness in his voice broke something in her. She pulled away, wrapping her arms around herself. The Jack I knew had pride. He'd never have settled for damaged goods. "You're not damaged." His voice was fierce. "You're the woman I love. That hasn't changed." "Everything's changed." She moved toward the door. "We're not those children who carved promises in tree bark. Too much has happened. Too much has been lost." "Not everything," Jack said softly. "Not if we don't let it be." Clara paused at the threshold, not turning around. "Bellamy comes tomorrow. He expects an answer about marriage. I have until then to decide which future holds less shame for this child. Let me talk to him. Let me— No." Now she did turn, and the exhaustion in her face made her look older than her years. "This is my choice to make, my consequences to live with. You've been gone 6 years. Jack, you don't get to ride in now and make decisions for me." She went inside, closing the door with quiet finality. Jack stood on the porch for a long moment, listening to the sounds of her moving about inside, the scrape of a chair, the clink of dishes. Such ordinary sounds for such an extraordinary moment. Finally, he gathered his tools and headed back toward town. But instead of returning to the hotel, he found himself at the old cottonwood tree. The initials were still there, scarred into the bark but visible in the moonlight. He traced them with one finger, remembering the boy who'd carved them with such certainty. That night, Clara lay in her narrow bed, one hand resting on the swell of her stomach. The baby moved, a flutter like bird wings, and she found herself talking to it as she often did in the darkness. "Your father was not a good man," she whispered. "But maybe that doesn't matter. Maybe you can be good despite him. Maybe we both can. She thought of Jack's offer, the simple solution it presented. Marriage to him would solve her practical problems, the debt, the shame, the struggle of raising a child alone. But what of the other problems? The weight of gratitude that would hang between them, the shadow of another man's child in their bed, the knowledge that she'd trapped him with her burdens, and yet the way he'd looked at her tonight, as if she were still precious, still worthy of love. The familiar comfort of working beside him, the ease that no amount of years could erase. Was it fair to deny them both that chance because of pride? A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. She rose carefully, wrapping a shawl around her nightdress, and peered through the window. Jack stood on her porch, hat in hand. "I know it's late," he said when she cracked the door open, "but I couldn't leave things as they were. Jack, please, I can't do this tonight." "Then just listen." He stayed on the porch, maintaining a proper distance. "I need you to know something. When I left 6 years ago, it wasn't because I wanted to. Your father made it clear I'd never be welcome here, never be good enough. I left to become someone who could give you the life you deserved. I never asked for—" "I know." He held up a hand. "You never asked for anything but me, and I was too proud and too young to understand that was enough. I thought I needed to prove something. To him, to you, to myself, and while I was off trying to become worthy of you, you were here, facing things no woman should face alone." Clara felt tears sliding down her cheeks. "It's not your fault. You couldn't have known. But I should have been here. Should have married you when we were 18 and poor and stupid with love. Should have told your father to go to hell and taken you away from here." His voice roughened. "So don't talk to me about settling or damaged goods or shame. The only shame here is mine for leaving you. Let me try to make it right." She stood in the doorway, torn between stepping forward into his arms and retreating into the safety of her house. In the end, she did neither, simply standing there as the night wind whispered around them. "I'll think about it," she said finally. "That's all I can promise." Jack nodded, settling his hat back on his head. "That's enough. For now." He walked away, his figure soon swallowed by darkness. Clara closed the door and leaned against it, her heart beating a rhythm she'd thought it had forgotten. Tomorrow, Bellamy would come with his threats wrapped in promises. Tomorrow, she would have to choose. But tonight, for just a moment, she allowed herself to remember what it felt like to be loved by a good man, to imagine a future where shame didn't shadow every step, where her child could grow up with a father's name and protection, where the past might truly be past. The baby moved again, stronger this time, as if sensing the change in her thoughts. Clara placed both hands over the movement, closing her eyes. "Maybe," she whispered to the darkness, "maybe we can still find our way home." Jack rode out into the wilderness as dawn broke, needing the solitude of the open range to clear his head. The bottle of whiskey in his saddlebag remained untouched. He'd learned in the mining camps that alcohol made a poor companion for important decisions. Instead, he pushed his horse hard across the scrubland, letting the rhythm of hoofbeats drown out the chaos in his mind. He found himself at the old camping spot deep in the canyon, where a small grove of cottonwoods clustered around a spring. The trees were larger now, their shade deeper, but the place remained unchanged. Here, hidden from the world, he and Clara had discovered each other in ways that went beyond mere words. Jack dismounted and sat on a fallen log, remembering. They'd been 19 that summer, sneaking away from the suspicious eyes of her father and the gossiping tongues of town. Clara had been nervous that first time, her hands shaking as she unpinned her hair. "We shouldn't," she'd whispered, even as she moved closer to him. "Then we won't," he'd replied, though every fiber of his being screamed otherwise. But she'd kissed him then, deep and sure, and they'd made love on a blanket spread over soft grass, the sound of the spring mixing with their whispered promises. Afterward, she'd traced patterns on his chest, her hair falling like a curtain around them. "I want to remember everything," she'd said, "the way the light looks through the leaves, the sound of the water, how your heartbeat feels under my hand." So when you're gone working the fields, I can close my eyes and be here again." They'd returned many times that summer, their secret place becoming sacred ground, even now, 6 years later. Jack could close his eyes and feel her weight against him, taste the salt of her skin, hear the way she said his name when the world fell away. The memory cut deep. Somewhere in town, that same woman was preparing to face Horace Bellamy, to potentially bind herself to a man who saw her as property to be acquired. The thought made Jack's fists clench. He spent the morning walking the grove, seeing ghosts in every shadow. When the sun reached its zenith, he knew he couldn't delay any longer. Whatever happened today would set the course for all their futures. The ride back to town seemed both endless and too short. As he approached the Whitmore farm, he saw Bellamy's carriage already there, black and imposing like a hearse. Jack dismounted quietly, tying his horse out of sight, and moved closer to the house. Through the window, he could see them in the parlor, Clara seated stiffly in her mother's old chair, Bellamy standing before her like a man delivering a sermon. Jack couldn't hear the words, but he could read the body language, Bellamy's possessive stance, Clara's defensive posture, the way she kept her hands folded protectively over her belly, unable to simply watch. Jack circled to the back door, easing it open. Their voices carried clearly now. "Generous offer, considering the circumstances," Bellamy was saying. "Another man might cast you aside entirely. Your generosity overwhelms me," Clara replied, her tone dry as dust. "Sarcasm doesn't become you. My dear, you're in no position to be prideful. A woman in your condition, with your debts, you should be grateful I'm willing to give the child my name." "Your name?" Clara's voice was thoughtful. "Tell me, Mr. Bellamy, what kind of father would you be to a child you consider evidence of my shame?" There was a pause. Then Bellamy's voice hardened. "The kind that keeps a roof over its head and food in its belly. The kind that ensures it doesn't grow up bearing the stigma of bastardry. Surely that's worth something. And, in return, you know what I want. A compliant wife, a well-run household, and perhaps additional children. Legitimate ones." His tone suggested he was discussing livestock breeding. "Your current condition proves you're fertile. At least." Jack had heard enough. He stepped into the parlor, his sudden appearance making Bellamy spin around. "Colton!" Bellamy's face flushed. "This is a private conversation. Nothing about Clara is private from me," Jack said evenly. "And I believe the lady has heard enough of your proposal." "The lady," Bellamy sneered, "is in no position to be particular, and you have no standing here." "Don't I?" Jack moved to stand beside Clara's chair, not touching her but close enough that his presence was unmistakable. "I think you'll find I have more standing than you realize." Clara looked up at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of surprise and warning. "Jack, what are you doing?" "What I should have done years ago." He faced Bellamy squarely. "Clara Whitmore is not available for your proposals, generous or otherwise. She's spoken for." Bellamy's laugh was ugly. "By you? The hired hand who ran off to play prospector? Even if she'd have you, which I doubt given her current state, you can't save her from her debts." "I own paper on this farm that—" "How much?" The simple question stopped Bellamy mid-sentence. "What? The debts? How much to clear them all?" Bellamy's eyes narrowed. "More than a failed miner could scrape together." Jack pulled a leather pouch from his coat. Upending it on the side table, gold coins spilled out, catching the afternoon light. Clara gasped, and Bellamy's face went through several interesting color changes. "Count it," Jack said. "That's just what I carry for traveling money. There's plenty more in the bank at Denver. Now, how much?" Bellamy named a figure, clearly inflating it. Jack didn't blink. "I'll pay double," he said quietly, "if you sign over every claim tonight and never set foot on this property again." "Double?" Bellamy's greed warred with suspicion. "Why would you?" "Because I can afford to. Because Clara deserves to be free of you. And because if I ever see you near her again, money will be the least of your concerns." The threat hung in the air between them. Bellamy looked from Jack to Clara, calculation in his eyes. "She's carrying my child," he said finally. "I have rights. You have nothing." Clara spoke for the first time since Jack's arrival, standing with quiet dignity despite her condition. "The child I carry is mine alone. You were just a man who took advantage when I was desperate and alone. That doesn't make you a father. I could make things difficult for you," Bellamy warned. The whole town knows you're a predator who preys on grieving women." Jack interrupted. "They also know I'm back with enough money to make their lives easier or harder, depending on how they treat my family." The word hung in the air, loaded with meaning. Clara's hand found Jack's, squeezing briefly before letting go. Bellamy's face twisted with rage, but greed won out. "I'll want it in writing. Proper bank drafts. Not just gold. Murphy's store has paper. We can draw up the documents now." Jack gathered the gold back into the pouch. "Unless you'd prefer to involve lawyers." "No." Bellamy was already calculating what he could do with double payment. "No lawyers. Just a simple transfer of debt." Within an hour, it was done. Bellamy left with his payment and a clear warning never to return. Jack and Clara stood on the porch, watching his carriage disappear into the dust. "Why?" Clara asked finally. "Why would you do this?" Jack turned to her, seeing the exhaustion in her face, the way she held herself as if braced for another blow. "You know why. The Jack I knew couldn't have afforded to throw away that much gold just to spite a man. I didn't do it to spite him. I did it to free you. And now I'm indebted to you instead." Her voice was bitter. "Is that really any better?" Jack felt frustration rise. "You're not indebted to me. The money's yours, free and clear. The farm, the land, all of it. I want nothing from you." "Nothing?" She laughed, the sound sharp. "You just paid a fortune for nothing? I paid a fortune for your freedom. What you do with it is your choice." Clara studied him, her blue eyes searching. "And if I choose to leave? Take the child somewhere no one knows me? Start over?" The thought was like a knife to his gut, but Jack kept his voice steady. "Then I'll help you get wherever you're going safely. And if I choose to stay, raise my child here, alone, weathering the whispers and judgment, then I'll make sure no one dares whisper too loudly. And if I—" She paused, biting her lip. "If I asked you to stay? To help me run the farm, just as friends, nothing more, then I'd stay, even knowing what I am, what I've done." Jack stepped closer, his voice fierce. "What you are is the woman who taught me to read by lamplight when I was too ashamed to admit I couldn't. The woman who sat with me all night when my mother died, never saying a word because you knew words wouldn't help. The woman who believed I could be more than just another hired hand, even when I didn't believe it myself." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "That woman is gone. Jack, she died the night Bellamy—" She couldn't finish. "No." Jack's hands hovered near her shoulders, not quite touching. "She's standing right in front of me, wounded, maybe, changed by what she survived, but still the strongest, most stubborn woman in the territory." A sob escaped her, and suddenly she was in his arms, crying against his chest as the sun set behind the mountains. Jack held her, feeling the swell of her belly between them, the evidence of another man's claim. But beneath that, he felt her heart beating against his, the same rhythm he remembered from all those years ago, when her tears finally slowed. Clara pulled back slightly, looking up at him. "I can't promise you anything. I don't know if I can ever be what we were. I'm not asking you to." Jack brushed a strand of hair from her face. "I'm just asking for the chance to help you heal, to be here, however you need me." She nodded slowly, exhaustion clear in every line of her body. "Will you stay for supper? I have stew on the stove." It was a small thing, an ordinary invitation, but Jack heard it for what it was, the first tentative step toward something new, built on the ashes of what they'd lost. "I'd like that," he said softly. They went inside together, the ghosts of the past trailing behind them, but for the first time in years, Those ghosts didn't seem quite as heavy. The future was uncertain, complicated by the child Clara carried and the scars they both bore. But as they sat at her kitchen table, sharing a simple meal and careful conversation, Jack felt something he'd thought lost in the goldfields: hope. Outside, stars began to appear in the darkening sky. The same stars that had watched over two young lovers sneaking away to their secret grove. Now they watched over two people finding their way back to each other, slowly, carefully, with no promises except the promise to try. The child moved in Clara's womb, and she placed a hand over the motion. Jack watched her, this woman who'd survived what would have broken others, and knew that whatever came next, he would not leave her to face it alone. Not again, not ever. The candle between them flickered in a draft from the window, casting dancing shadows on the walls, but the light held steady, pushing back the darkness one small flame at a time. The days settled into a rhythm that felt both new and achingly familiar. Jack arrived each morning as the sun painted the mountains gold, working alongside Clara to repair years of neglect. They spoke carefully around the edges of important things, finding safety in discussions of fence posts and crop rotation. Clara watched him from the kitchen window as he split wood, noting the new scars on his hands from the mines, the way his shoulders had broadened with hard labor. Sometimes their eyes would meet across the yard, and the air would thicken with unspoken words before one of them looked away. The barn became their project. Jack reinforced sagging beams, while Clara organized tools that had been scattered since her father's death. They worked in companionable silence, only the occasional request for a hammer or comment about the weather breaking the quiet. One afternoon, a sudden storm swept down from the mountains. They barely made it to the house before the sky opened, rain hammering the roof like desperate fists. Clara put coffee on while Jack stoked the fire, both of them soaked through. "You'll catch your death," Clara said, handing him a towel. "There are some of Father's clothes in the trunk upstairs. They might fit." Jack hesitated. Wearing Thomas Whitmore's clothes felt like crossing a line, but Clara had already turned away, busying herself with cups and saucers. He climbed the narrow stairs, finding the trunk in the room that had been hers as a girl. The space was sparse now, but traces remained. A sampler on the wall, a pressed flower between window glass, marks on the door frame tracking her growth. Jack touched the highest mark, remembering the summer she'd stretched on tiptoes, insisting she'd grown a full inch. When he returned downstairs in dry clothes, Clara's breath caught. The shirt was too broad in the shoulders, the trousers a bit short, but something about seeing him in her father's things made her heart twist. "They suit you," she said quietly, pouring coffee with steady hands. They sat by the fire, rain creating a curtain between them and the world. The intimacy of it, wet hair, borrowed clothes, firelight made the careful distance they'd maintained feel suddenly fragile. "Tell me about California," Clara said, needing words to fill the dangerous quiet. Jack spoke of gold camps and claim jumpers, of fortunes made and lost on the turn of a card. He told her about men driven mad by gold fever, about the Chinese workers who taught him to read the river's secrets, about nights so cold he thought he'd never be warm again. "But you succeeded," Clara observed. "You found what you were looking for." "Did I?" Jack stared into his coffee. "I found gold, enough to make me rich by any measure, but sitting in those camps, counting nuggets by lamplight, I realized something. Gold's just cold metal. It doesn't keep you warm at night, doesn't laugh at your jokes, doesn't—" He stopped himself. "Doesn't what?" "Doesn't matter much when you're alone." The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney. Clara shifted, one hand moving unconsciously to her belly as the baby stirred. "Is it active?" Jack asked hesitantly. Clara nodded. "More each day." "Sometimes at night. I swear it's dancing. May I—" Jack's hand hovered in the air between them. Clara caught her breath. It was too intimate, too much like something a husband might do. But the longing in his eyes undid her. She took his hand and placed it on the swell beneath her dress. They waited, barely breathing, until the baby moved. a rolling motion like a wave. Jack's face transformed with wonder. "Lord above," he whispered. "There's really a person in there." "A person who'll need explaining," Clara said, reality creeping back. "A child who'll grow up asking questions I don't know how to answer." Jack's hand remained on her belly, warm through the fabric. Children don't need complicated answers. They need love, safety, someone to chase away nightmares. "Is that what you're offering? To chase away nightmares?" "If you'll let me." The moment stretched between them, heavy with possibility. Then Clara pulled back, standing abruptly. "The rain's stopping." "You should go before dark." Jack wanted to argue, to push past the walls she kept building. Instead, he collected his wet things and headed for the door. "Same time tomorrow?" he asked. Clara nodded, not meeting his eyes. "There's still the chicken coop to repair." That night, sleep eluded them both. Clara lay in her narrow bed, reliving the feeling of Jack's hand on her belly, the wonder in his eyes at the baby's movement. She tried to imagine explaining to her child about its real father, about the nights she'd endured to keep their home. The shame of it burned like acid. Miles away in town. Jack stared at the hotel ceiling, thinking of Clara alone in that farmhouse. He'd seen the way she started at sudden sounds, how she kept her distance from him as if afraid of her own wanting. Whatever Bellamy had done had left scars deeper than skin. The next evening found them working late to finish the chicken coop before another storm rolled in. As they secured the last board, Clara's hammer slipped, catching her thumb. She cried out, dropping the tool. Jack was beside her instantly, cradling her injured hand. "Let me see." "It's nothing," Clara protested, but tears sprang to her eyes, more from his tenderness than pain. Jack led her to the water barrel, gently cleaning the wound. His touch was careful, reverent, as if her hand were made of spun glass. When he lifted it to his lips, pressing the softest kiss to her injured thumb, Clara made a sound somewhere between a sob and a sigh. "Jack, I know." He didn't release her hand. "I know we can't go back. I know too much has happened. But Clara, I need you to understand something." She waited, heart hammering. "When I left, I thought I was doing the right thing. Thought I'd come back worthy of you, able to give you everything you deserved. But while I was chasing fool's gold, you were here facing real dragons, and you slayed them. Clara. Alone, afraid, but you slayed them." "I didn't slay anything," she whispered. "I survived. That's all. That's everything." His hands cupped her face, thumbs brushing away tears she hadn't realized were falling. "You survived what would have destroyed most people. You're still standing, still fighting, still the bravest person I know." The space between them crackled with electricity. Clara swayed forward, drawn by the gravity of old love and new understanding. Their lips were a breath apart when thunder crashed overhead, breaking the spell. They jumped apart as the sky opened, rain falling in sheets, laughing despite everything. They ran for the house, arriving soaked and breathless. This time, Clara didn't suggest he leave. Instead, she built up the fire while Jack made tea, moving around each other with practiced ease. "We're good at this," Clara observed, watching him find cups without asking where they were kept. "At what?" "Being together, taking care of each other. It's like my hands remember how to move when you're near." Jack set down the teapot, something intense in his eyes. "What else do they remember?" Clara's breath caught. The question hung between them, loaded with meaning. She thought of all the ways they'd touched years ago, innocent and not, sacred and profane, everything in between. "Too much," she admitted. "They remember too much." "Is that so terrible?" "Yes," the word came out fierce. "Because I'm not that girl anymore. Because there's a child inside me that isn't yours. Because every time you look at me with those eyes, I forget why this can't work." "Then forget," Jack said simply. "Just for tonight, forget." The rain hammered harder, sealing them in. Clara felt her resolve weakening, undermined by proximity and memory and the ache of wanting what they'd lost. "I'm afraid," she confessed. "Of me. Of myself. of how much I want to pretend nothing's changed, of what happens when morning comes and reality returns. Jack moved closer, not touching, but near enough she could feel his warmth. Then we take it moment by moment. No promises about morning, no plans beyond right now. Just be with me, Clara, however you can. She looked up at him. This man who'd crossed deserts and mountains to come back to her, who'd paid a fortune for her freedom without asking anything in return, who looked at her swollen belly with wonder instead of disgust. Just tonight, she whispered, a question and permission both. His kiss was answer enough, gentle at first, almost hesitant, as if they were learning each other anew. Then Clara's hands tangled in his hair, and the careful distance they'd maintained shattered like glass. They kissed like drowning souls finding air, like wanderers coming home. Jack's hands traced the new curves of her body, reverent and hungry both. When they finally broke apart, both were trembling. Clara, we don't have to. Shh. She pressed fingers to his lips. No thinking. Not tonight. She led him upstairs to her room, to the bed where she'd cried herself to sleep so many nights. But tonight there would be no tears, only the sweet ache of reunion and the tenderness of two people choosing each other despite everything. They made love slowly, carefully. Jack treating her body like a temple he was privileged to worship. Every touch was a conversation, every sigh an answer to questions they couldn't voice. The baby rested quiet between them, as if understanding this moment's sanctity. Afterward, they lay entwined, rain still drumming the roof. Clara traced the new scars on Jack's chest, evidence of his hard years away. I used to imagine you coming back, she said softly. But it was never like this. How was it? Simpler. You'd ride up, sweep me onto your horse, and we'd disappear into the sunset, no complications, no consequences, just us. Reality's messier, Jack agreed, pressing a kiss to her hair. Reality hurts, sometimes. But it's also this us, here, now, that's real too. Clara turned in his arms, studying his face in the dim light. What happens tomorrow, Jack? When the sun rises and the town sees your horse still here? When my belly grows bigger with another man's child? When... Tomorrow we face whatever comes. He interrupted gently. Together, if you'll have me, apart, if that's what you need. But tonight, just let me hold you. Let me pretend I never left, that we got those simple dreams after all. She nodded against his chest, feeling safer than she had in years. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside their small circle of warmth, peace reigned, as sleep finally claimed them. Clara's last thought was of the baby, their baby now. If Jack had his way, perhaps love wasn't about blood after all. Perhaps it was about choosing to stay when leaving would be easier, about seeing beauty where others saw only shame, about coming home, no matter how long the journey or how much had changed along the way. The morning sun revealed what the night had hidden. Jack's horse still tethered outside Clara's house, his presence unmistakable to anyone passing by. By the time he rode back to town, the damage was done. Curtains twitched, conversations halted mid-sentence, and judgment settled over Redemption Creek like dust after a stampede. At Murphy's General Store, Mrs. Henderson cornered Mrs. Pruitt near the fabric display. Did you hear? That Colton boy spent the night at the Whitmore place, as if the poor girl hadn't shamed herself enough already. Shameless. Mrs. Pruitt agreed, loud enough for other customers to hear. First Bellamy, now Colton. Mark my words, that child won't be the last if she keeps carrying on this way. Jack entered the store just as the words left her mouth. The women fell silent, but their expressions spoke volumes. He selected his purchases with deliberate calm, then turned to face them. Ladies, he said, touching his hat brim, a fine morning for gossip. I see, though I'd think Christian women might find better uses for their tongues. Mrs. Henderson flushed. Mr. Colton, I'm sure I don't know what you mean. I'm sure you do. His voice remained pleasant, but steel ran beneath it. Just as I'm sure you know that spreading false witness is a sin. almost as grave a sin as turning your back on a neighbor in need. He paid for his goods and left, but not before adding, "I'll be escorting Miss Whitmore to church on Sunday. I trust we'll see you there. The sermon on casting the first stone should be particularly relevant." The encounter was the first of many. Everywhere Jack went, whispers followed. At the saloon, men made crude jokes about his taste for broken goods. On the street, respectable citizens crossed to avoid him. The bankers suggested, delicately, that perhaps Jack might prefer to move his accounts to Denver. But it was Clara who bore the worst of it. When she came to town for supplies, women pulled their children close as if her condition might be contagious. At the mercantile, she found herself waiting while others were served first, the clerk claiming he'd misplaced items she needed. One afternoon, Jack found her crying behind the store, a basket of eggs smashed at her feet. "Let me guess," he said gently, kneeling to help her clean up. "You accidentally dropped them." Clara laughed bitterly. "According to Mrs. Wallace, I threw myself at them. Apparently, fallen women can't help destroying everything they touch." "Mrs. Wallace is an idiot." "Mrs. Wallace is the minister's wife." Clara's voice broke. "If even she won't show Christian charity." Jack pulled her to her feet, cupping her face in his hands. "Then we'll make our own charity, our own grace. To hell with the rest of them." But bravado couldn't shield them from everything. That Sunday, when Jack kept his promise to escort Clara to church, they found their usual pew occupied. Every pew, in fact, seemed mysteriously full. They stood at the back through the service, Clara's condition making standing painful, while Reverend Wallace preached about the wages of sin. Outside afterward, Horace Bellamy appeared, flanked by several prominent townsmen. "Colton," he said, loud enough for the departing congregation to hear, "I've been patient, but this has gone far enough. You're interfering with my legal rights." "You have no rights where Clara's concerned," Jack replied evenly. "Don't I?" Bellamy produced a paper from his coat. "This says otherwise. A sworn statement about the paternity of her child, signed and witnessed." Clara paled. "You wouldn't dare." "I'm a reasonable man." Bellamy continued, "I'm willing to withdraw my claim. Void this document. All Mr. Colton has to do is leave town. Today. Don't come back. Or," Jack's hand moved instinctively toward his hip, though he wore no gun to church, "or I file this with the circuit judge when he comes through next week. Establish my paternal rights legally. The child would be mine by law, regardless of who its mother chooses to associate with." The crowd murmured, scandal-hungry and horrified in equal measure. Clara swayed, and Jack steadied her. "You're bluffing," Jack said. No judge would deny a father his rights." Bellamy interrupted. "Especially when the mother is a woman of questionable virtue, carrying on with multiple men. I have witnesses who'll testify to her moral unfitness." "Witnesses you've paid," Jack snarled. "Prove it." Bellamy's smile was cold. "Leave town. Colton, let her come to me willingly, as she should have months ago, or stay and watch me take the child anyway. Your choice." Jack felt Clara trembling beside him, saw the fear in her eyes. The crowd pressed closer, eager for his response. He thought of all the ways he could end this. Violence, bribery, legal maneuvering, but looking at Clara's exhausted face, he chose differently. "You want me gone?" Jack said loudly. "Fine, but first, everyone here is going to hear the truth." "Jack, no," Clara whispered, but he continued. "Horace Bellamy is a predator who preys on desperate women. When Clara's father died, leaving her with debts no honest person could pay, Bellamy didn't offer Christian charity. He offered a devil's bargain, her body for time on the loans. When she finally gave in, out of desperation to save her family's land, he took what he wanted and left her with child." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Bellamy's face purpled. "You can't prove—" "I don't need to prove it," Jack interrupted. "Everyone here knows what kind of man you are. How many other widows have you helped over the years? How many other desperate women?" "Lies," Bellamy sputtered. Slander! Truth, said a quiet voice from the crowd. Mrs. Morrison, a widow herself, stepped forward. He came to me after my William died. Same offers, same threats. I sold everything and moved to my sister's rather than... But not everyone has a sister to run to. Another woman nodded silently. Then another. The crowd's mood shifted. Uncomfortable truths surfacing like oil on water. Bellamy backed toward his carriage. This isn't over. Colton, that child is mine by right, and I'll... He never finished. Jack's fist connected with his jaw, sending him sprawling in the dusty street. Jack stood over him, breathing hard. The child is Clara's, he said quietly. And if you come near either of them again, you'll answer to me. Not in court, not with papers. Just you, me, and whatever weapons you choose. Are we clear? Bellamy scrambled to his feet, helped by his driver. He cast one venomous look at Clara before fleeing in his carriage. The crowd began to disperse, some shooting sympathetic glances at Clara, others muttering about scandal and shame. Reverend Wallace approached hesitantly. Mr. Colton, while I cannot condone violence, especially on the Sabbath. Save your sermons, Reverend, Jack said tiredly. We won't darken your doorstep again. Now, I didn't say... Wallace glanced at his wife, then at Clara. Perhaps I've been hasty. Perhaps we all have. The Bible speaks of forgiveness. After all, the Bible speaks of many things. Clara said quietly, including not judging lest ye be judged, something this town seems to have forgotten. She turned to Jack. Take me home, please. They rode in silence. Clara sitting close to Jack on the wagon seat, uncaring now who saw. At the farm, she allowed him to help her down, then surprised him by not pulling away. You didn't have to do that, she said. Make a scene. Risk Bellamy's lawyers. Yes, I did. Jack touched her cheek gently. I've been silent too long. Let you bear this alone too long. No more. The whole town knows now. About Bellamy, about what I did, what you survived. Jack corrected. And knowing is different from acknowledging. Some of them knew already, just preferred to pretend otherwise. Clara leaned into his touch. They'll make our lives miserable. You know that, don't you? The whispers, the judgment. It won't stop just because you hit Bellamy. Then we'll build a life that doesn't need their approval. Jack pulled her closer. Marry me, Clara. Not someday. Not when the scandal dies down. Tomorrow. Let me give you my name. Give the child my name. Let them whisper about that instead. Jack. Clara's eyes filled with tears. You don't have to. I want to. God help me. I've never wanted anything more. He pressed his forehead to hers. I love you. Not the memory of you. Not the girl you were. You, as you are right now. Pregnant with another man's child. Scorned by the town. Stubborn as a mule. And beautiful as sunrise. Marry me. Clara pulled back to search his face. What about children of your own? What about... This child will be mine, Jack said firmly. And if God blesses us with more, they'll be mine too. If not, one is miracle enough. The town can go to hell. Bellamy. We'll learn what happens when he threatens my family. Your family, Clara repeated softly. Is that what we'd be? That's what we already are. Jack placed his hand over her belly, feeling the baby move. This little one just doesn't know it yet. Clara covered his hand with hers, and for a moment they stood there, 3 hearts beating in unison. His, hers, and the tiny one between them. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady. Yes. Yes, yes, I'll marry you. Tomorrow, if Reverend Wallace will perform the ceremony. Next week, if we have to find someone else. But yes. Jack kissed her then, pouring years of longing and promises into the connection. When they broke apart, both were crying and laughing simultaneously. We'll face hell for this, Clara warned. Already have, Jack replied. Might as well face it together. That evening, they sat on the porch planning their simple wedding. watching the sun set over the mountains. The town might rage, Bellamy might scheme, and tomorrow would surely bring new challenges. But for now, they had this, each other, the child growing between them, and the choice to build something new from the ashes of what they'd lost. The stars emerged one by one, ancient witnesses to another love story in the making. And somewhere in the darkness, a coyote howled, not lonely this time, but calling to its mate across the vast expanse of prairie, knowing that no distance was too great when you belonged to someone who would always answer. The morning of their wedding dawned gray and threatening, clouds heavy with unshed snow. Jack stood before the mirror in his hotel room, adjusting a string tie he'd bought specially for the occasion. His hands were steady, but his heart raced like a spooked Mustang. "You sure about this?" Pete Harrison asked from the doorway. The old rancher had surprised Jack by offering to stand as witness. "Whole town's talking. Bellamy's been making threats all week. Let him threaten." Jack turned from the mirror. "I should have done this 6 years ago." 6 years ago? She wasn't carrying another man's child," Pete observed. "That doesn't bother you?" Jack thought of Clara's face when she'd felt the baby move, the fierce protectiveness in her eyes. "The child needs a father. I need a family. Seems like a fair trade." "Fair?" Pete shook his head. "Son, there's nothing fair about what you're taking on, but damned if I don't admire you for it." At the Whitmore farm, Clara sat before her mother's vanity, pinning up her hair with trembling fingers. She wore her mother's wedding dress, let out carefully to accommodate her condition. In the mirror, she hardly recognized herself, pale, hollow-eyed, heavily pregnant. Not exactly the blushing bride she'd once imagined being. A knock at the door made her heart skip. "Come in." "Mrs." Morrison entered, carrying a small bouquet of winter roses. "Thought you might need these," she said gruffly. "A bride should have flowers, no matter what the gossips say." Clara's eyes filled. "Mrs. Morrison, you don't have to—" "Hush." The older woman adjusted Clara's veil with practiced hands. "I've held my tongue too long, watching that Bellamy prey on folks. You did what you had to do, girl. No shame in surviving. The rest of the town doesn't see it that way. The rest of the town hasn't buried a husband and faced winter with empty cupboards." "Mrs." Morrison's face softened. "That Colton boy loves you fierce. Any fool can see it. That child will be lucky to have him as a father." Clara touched her belly, feeling the baby shift. What if I can't love him the way I used to? What if too much has changed?" "Love changes." "Mrs." Morrison said simply. "First time around, it's all fire and lightning. Second time, if you're lucky enough to get a second time, it's choosing to build something sturdy enough to weather the storms. That boy out there, he's choosing you, knowing full well what storms are coming. Question is, are you choosing him back?" Clara met her own eyes in the mirror, seeing past the fear to something deeper. Yes, I am." The ceremony took place in Reverend Wallace's parlor, not the church, a compromise that satisfied no one but was better than nothing. Jack waited by the fireplace, resplendent in his new suit, trying not to pace. When Clara entered on Pete Harrison's arm, his breath caught. She was luminous, despite everything. The dress couldn't hide her condition, but she wore it like armor, chin high and eyes clear. When she reached him, Jack took her hands, finding them cold even through her gloves. "You came," he murmured. "Did you doubt?" "Every second until now." Reverend Wallace cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. "Dearly beloved, though I see precious few beloved here, we are gathered to witness the union of Jackson Colton and Clara Whitmore. Given the unusual circumstances, I'll keep this brief." Jack felt Clara tense at the words, but she kept her eyes on his face. He squeezed her hands, trying to pour all his love and certainty through that simple touch. "Do you, Jackson, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, until death do you part?" "I do." The words rang clear and strong. "Do you, Clara, Take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse. Until death do you part." Clara's voice was quieter but no less certain. "I do." "The rings?" Jack produced 2 simple gold bands, purchased with some of his carefully hoarded gold. As he slipped one onto Clara's finger, he spoke the words he'd memorized. "With this ring I thee wed. With my body I thee worship. With all my worldly goods I thee endow." Clara repeated the words, her hand trembling slightly as she placed the ring on his finger. For a moment, they stood frozen. 2 people who'd taken an irrevocable step into an uncertain future. "I now pronounce you man and wife," Reverend Wallace said hurriedly. "You may kiss the bride." Jack cupped Clara's face gently, aware of their small audience, of all the weight this moment carried. The kiss was soft, almost chaste, but beneath it ran currents of promise and possession and hope. "It's done," Clara whispered against his lips. "It's just beginning," Jack corrected. They signed the register, Pete and Mrs. Morrison witnessing. As they prepared to leave, Reverend Wallace pulled Jack aside. "Bellamy was here yesterday," he said quietly, "demanding I refused to perform the ceremony. When I cited religious obligation, he made, threats." "What kind of threats?" "The kind backed by lawyers and influence." Wallace looked troubled. "I've done what my conscience demanded, but I can't protect you from what comes next. He won't accept this quietly." Jack's jaw set. "Let him come." Outside, snow had begun to fall, fat flakes that caught in Clara's veil. They'd borrowed Pete's buggy for the occasion, decorated with a few brave ribbons by Mrs. Morrison. As Jack helped Clara up, a figure emerged from the shadows. Horace Bellamy stood in the street, backed by several hired men. His face was mottled with rage, though a week-old bruise from Jack's fist still marked his jaw. "Stop right there," he commanded. "This farce has gone far enough." Jack stepped forward, placing himself between Bellamy and Clara. "We're legally married. You have no claim here." "Legal?" Bellamy laughed harshly. "A desperate woman marries a fortune hunter to legitimize her bastard. And you call that legal? I'll have it annulled within the week." "On what grounds?" Jack kept his voice level, though his hands clenched. "Fraud. Coercion. Prior claim." Bellamy produced a sheaf of papers. "I filed paternity with the territorial court. That child she carries is mine, and no rushed marriage changes that." "Liar," Clara said from the buggy, her voice carrying clear through the falling snow. "You know exactly how that child was conceived. Through threats and desperation, not love or choice." "Prove it." Bellamy sneered. "Your word against mine. Who do you think the judge will believe? A respected businessman or a woman who sold herself for a few months' grace on a loan?" The words hung in the cold air like poison. Jack felt rather than saw Clara flinch behind him. Something inside him, some last restraint born of civilization, snapped. "Get out of our way," he said quietly, "or I'll move you myself. Touch me again, and I'll have you arrested for assault." Bellamy gestured to his men. "I have witnesses this time." "Good." Jack smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. "They can testify about what happens to men who threaten my wife." The tension stretched taut, violence hovering like the snow in the air. Then Pete Harrison spoke from the church steps. "Seems to me there's been enough threatening for one day," he said mildly. "Also seems to me that a man who'd force himself on a grieving woman isn't the kind of man who should be raising a child." "No one forced," Bellamy began. "I was at Murphy's store the day after Thomas died," Pete continued. "Heard you talking about how grief makes women pliable. How Clara would come around once she got hungry enough. We all heard it, didn't we? Boys?" Several men in the gathering crowd nodded reluctantly. Murphy himself emerged from his store, looking uncomfortable but determined. "I heard it too," he admitted. "Didn't sit right then. Doesn't sit right now." Bellamy's face darkened. "You're all making a mistake. I have influence, connections. I can make life very difficult for anyone who stands against me." "Then I guess life's about to get difficult," said a new voice. Doc Winters pushed through the crowd, medical bag in hand. "Because I'll be testifying too, about the bruises I treated on Miss Clara, Mrs. Colton now, after your visits. About the state she was in when she finally came to confirm her pregnancy. Any judge worth his salt will see the truth in that." More voices joined in, people who'd stayed silent out of fear or propriety. Now, speaking up, not everyone, not even most, but enough. Bellamy found himself facing a wall of quiet determination. "This isn't over," he snarled. "You think you've won? I'll bury you in legal fees. I'll make sure no bank, no merchant, no one in this territory will do business with you. You'll be begging me for mercy before spring." Jack helped Clara down from the buggy, supporting her as she faced Bellamy directly. "We've survived worse than anything you can do," she said steadily. "And we'll survive you too. We'll see about that." Bellamy turned on his heel, his men following. As his carriage pulled away, the crowd began to disperse, some offering quiet congratulations, others just melting back into the snowy afternoon. Jack and Clara stood in the street, snow settling on their wedding clothes. The confrontation had drained them both, but something had shifted. They weren't alone anymore, not completely. "Take me home," Clara said softly. "Our home." Jack helped her back into the buggy, and they drove through the thickening snow toward the farm. Behind them, the town buzzed with gossip, but ahead lay only the quiet promise of their land and their life together. As they pulled up to the farmhouse, Clara gasped, pressing a hand to her side. "What is it?" Jack asked, alarmed. "Nothing, just the baby's very active today. I think it knows something important happened." Jack carried her over the threshold. Tradition observed despite everything. Inside, they'd prepared a wedding supper, simple fare, but special in its intention. They ate by candlelight while snow piled against the windows, creating a cocoon of warmth and intimacy. "I have something for you," Jack said when they'd finished. He produced a small leather pouch. "It's not much, but—" Clara opened it to find a delicate gold locket. Inside was a tiny photograph, the two of them, taken years ago at a traveling photographer's tent. "You kept it," she breathed. "Carried it every day I was gone. Even when I thought I'd lost you forever, I couldn't let it go." Clara's eyes filled. "I'm not that girl anymore." "Jack." "No," he agreed, fastening the locket around her neck. "You're stronger, braver, more beautiful for having survived." He rested his hand over the locket, feeling her heartbeat beneath. "And you're my wife. That's all that matters now." They retired early, exhausted by emotion and conflict. In their marriage bed, their true marriage bed. Not stolen moments, but sanctioned union. They held each other as snow sealed the world outside. "What if Bellamy's right?" Clara whispered in the darkness. "What if he can take everything?" "Then we'll start over somewhere else." Jack replied, "California, Oregon, anywhere you want. But Clara, I don't think he will." Today, people stood up. Not everyone, but enough. He's not as powerful as he thinks. "And if he tries to take the baby?" Jack's arms tightened around her. "Over my dead body." They lay quietly, feeling the child move between them. Their child now, in every way that mattered. Outside, the storm raged. But inside, they'd found shelter in each other. "I love you," Clara said suddenly. "I didn't think I could again, but I do, different than before, but maybe stronger." "I love you too," Jack replied. "Have since the day you taught me my letters. Will until the day they put me in the ground." As sleep took them, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in white. It covered the tracks of Bellamy's carriage, the gossip's footprints, all the ugly remnants of the day. In the morning, they would wake to a clean slate, a world made new. And in Clara's womb, the baby settled into quiet, as if sensing it was finally safe, finally home, finally claimed by love instead of law. The blizzard struck 3 weeks after their wedding, trapping them in the farmhouse as nature unleashed its fury. Jack had seen it coming in the way the horses grew restless, and the air took on a peculiar stillness. He'd worked frantically to prepare, chopping extra wood, securing the livestock, patching every crack where wind might enter. Now, as snow piled halfway up the windows and wind screamed like a living thing, Clara paced the kitchen, one hand pressed to her lower back. "You need to rest," Jack said, watching her with growing concern. "Can't. Too restless." She paused, gripping the table edge. "The baby's been moving all day. Feels different somehow." A contraction rippled across her belly, visible even through her dress. Clara's eyes widened. "Jack." "No." He was beside her instantly. "It's too early. You've got another month. Tell that to the baby." Another contraction hit, stronger this time, and Clara doubled over with a gasp. Jack's mind raced. Doc Winters was in town, miles away through an impassable blizzard. They were alone, completely alone, with Clara's labor beginning and no help possible. "Let's get you to bed," he said, fighting to keep his voice calm. "I'm scared," Clara admitted as he helped her to their bedroom. "What if something goes wrong? What if nothing's going wrong?" Jack settled her on the bed, then began gathering supplies, clean linens, hot water, the knife he'd sterilized just in case. "Women have been having babies since the dawn of time. We'll manage." But as the hours passed and Clara's labor intensified, his confidence wavered. She was pale, sweating despite the cold, crying out with each contraction. Jack had helped deliver calves and foals. But this was Clara. This was their child, and the weight of responsibility crushed him. "Talk to me," Clara gasped between pains. "Distract me. Tell me about California again." So Jack talked. He told her about gold nuggets glinting in stream beds, about mountains that scraped the sky, about men who'd lost everything chasing dreams. He talked until his throat was raw, holding her hand as she squeezed hard enough to crack bones. Night deepened. The storm raged on. Clara's cries grew more desperate. "I can't," she sobbed. "Jack, I can't do this." "Yes, you can." He wiped her face with a cool cloth. "You're the strongest person I know. You survived your father's death, Bellamy, the town's judgment. You can survive this too." "What if it's punishment?" Clara's eyes were wild with pain and fear. "What if God's punishing me for what I did, for letting Bellamy—" "Stop." Jack gripped her shoulders gently. "This baby is not a punishment. It's a gift. Our gift. And you did nothing wrong. You survived. Now you need to survive again. For the baby. For us." Clara nodded, finding strength in his certainty. When the next contraction came, she bore down with renewed determination. The candles burned low. Jack replaced them, maintaining their circle of light against the darkness. Outside, the wind howled like wolves. But inside, another sound was building, the ancient rhythm of life fighting to begin. "I see the head," Jack said suddenly, his voice thick with emotion. "Clara, I can see. Dark hair. So much dark hair. Like yours." Clara panted. "Like yours," he corrected, though they both knew the truth. 3 more pushes, each one tearing a scream from Clara's throat. Then, in a rush of fluid and blood, the baby emerged into Jack's waiting hands. For a heartbeat, the world stopped. No storm, no past, no future. Just this tiny, perfect creature covered in birth fluids and possibility. The baby didn't cry immediately. Jack's heart seized as he cleared its mouth and nose, remembering what he'd seen done with difficult animal births. Still nothing. Clara struggled to sit up, reaching for her child. "Why isn't it crying? Jack, why?" He turned the baby, patting its back firmly. Once, twice. A wail split the air, thin and angry and absolutely beautiful. Jack's knees nearly buckled with relief. "It's a girl," he said, wrapping the squalling infant in clean linen. "You have a daughter, Clara." "We have a daughter," Clara corrected, holding out her arms. Jack placed the baby on Clara's chest, watching as mother and child saw each other for the first time. The baby's cries softened to whimpers, then stopped entirely as she found her mother's breast. "She's perfect," Clara whispered, touching the tiny fingers. the dark hair plastered to the small skull. How can something so perfect come from love? Jack interrupted firmly. Maybe not the love that created her, but the love that waited for her. The love that will raise her. Clara looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. Do you mean that? Can you really look at her and not see? Jack sat on the bed beside them, one arm around Clara, one finger stroking the baby's cheek. I see my daughter. I see the child I'll teach to ride, who'll help with chores, who'll wrap me around her little finger. I see our beginning. The baby finished nursing and lay content, dark eyes struggling to focus. Jack took her carefully, marveling at how light she was, how fragile and strong at once. What shall we name her? Clara asked. Jack considered. Outside, the storm was finally dying, wind gentling from scream to whisper. Through a break in the snow clouds, a single star shone. Hope, he said. Hope, Elizabeth Colton. Hope, Clara repeated, testing the name. Born in a storm but finding safety. Yes, that's perfect. They spent the rest of the night in a bubble of quiet joy, taking turns holding Hope, marveling at her tiny features. Jack helped Clara deliver the afterbirth, cleaned her up, changed the bedding, all the messy, intimate work of birth that bound them together in new ways. As dawn broke, the storm had passed, leaving the world crystalline and new. Jack looked out at the transformed landscape while Clara dozed. Hope cradled between them. A movement caught his eye. Riders approaching through the snow. His hand went to the rifle, but as they drew closer, he recognized Doc Winters and Pete Harrison. Saw your smoke, Pete called as Jack met them at the door. Figured we'd check if you'd weathered the storm all right. More than all right, Jack said, unable to contain his grin. Clara had the baby. Doc Winters pushed past him immediately. In this storm? Alone? Good Lord. Man, let me see her. While the doctor examined Clara and Hope, pronouncing both remarkably healthy, Pete pulled Jack aside. Bellamy left town yesterday, he said quietly. Before the storm hit. Word is, some federal marshals came around asking questions about his business practices. Seems he's been playing fast and loose with land claims. Not just here, but all over the territory. Jack felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He's really gone. For now, maybe for good, if the marshals have their way. Pete clapped him on the shoulder. You can breathe easy, son. Focus on that family of yours. When Doc Winters emerged, he was shaking his head. That wife of yours is tougher than rawhide. Baby small but strong. You did good work here, Jack. Clara did the work. I just caught. Don't sell yourself short. Many men would have panicked, done more harm than good. You kept your head, kept her calm. That's no small thing. After they left, promising to spread word of the safe delivery, Jack returned to the bedroom. Clara was awake, nursing Hope again. Bellamy's gone, he told her. Run off ahead of federal marshals. Clara closed her eyes briefly. It's over then. Really over. The hard part is, now comes the living. I can live with that. She shifted, making room for him on the bed. Hold us? Jack gathered his girls. How strange and wonderful to think it, into his arms. Hope made small, contented sounds, milk-drunk and peaceful. Clara leaned into his chest, exhaustion and relief making her pliant. I used to dream about our children, she murmured. When we were young, I'd imagine what they'd look like. Your eyes, my stubbornness. She's got your stubbornness already, Jack said, remembering the baby's fierce wails. And she's got something else too. What's that? A chance, a clean start, a father who chose her and a mother who fought for her. He pressed a kiss to Clara's hair. That's more than most get. As the sun climbed higher, bathing their room in clean winter light, they dozed together. Hope lay between them, tiny chest rising and falling, unaware of the journey that had brought them to this moment, the pain, the shame, the choosing and being chosen. Spring would come soon, bringing planting season and new challenges. The town would eventually accept them or not. Hope would grow, asking questions they'd have to find ways to answer. But for now, in the quiet aftermath of storm and birth. They were simply a family. Jack's last thought before sleep took him was of the cottonwood tree where he'd carved their initials so long ago. Come spring, he'd take Hope there, show her where her parents' story began. He'd tell her how love could be lost and found again, how families were made not just of blood, but of choice, how sometimes the best things came from the hardest seasons. The baby stirred, making soft sounds, and Clara hummed a lullaby Jack remembered from their youth, as her voice wove through the morning air. Sweet and sure, Jack knew with bone-deep certainty that they'd found their way home at last, not to the place they'd imagined in their youth, but to something harder won and more precious, a love that had survived separation, betrayal, and judgment to emerge stronger, like grass pushing through snow toward the sun. Hope's tiny hand wrapped around his finger, holding tight with surprising strength. Jack smiled, understanding the promise in that grip. Whatever came next, they would face it together, all three of them, bound not by shame or obligation, but by the fierce, redemptive power of choosing each other again and again, until choice became simply another word for love. In the barn, their horses nickered softly, sensing the change in the air. Soon the paths would clear, and life would resume its patterns. But this moment, Clara's warmth beside him, Hope's weight on his chest, the three hearts beating in quiet rhythm, this moment was eternal, carved deep as any initials in bark, lasting as any promise made under western stars. They were home. Thank you all for listening to this story of love, redemption, and the choices that define us. I'm curious, where in the world are you listening from? Whether you're in a bustling city or a quiet countryside, I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Please subscribe to From Wild West channel and share your thoughts on Clara and Jack's journey. Did their story touch your heart as it did mine? Let's connect across the miles and share in the magic of storytelling together.